Great. Okay. Well, Johan, Niklas alluded to quite a few of the major challenges that are facing humanity at the moment. Now, you are director of the Stockholm Resilience Centre. Could you start just by telling us a bit, what does your job entail? What are you doing there?
Yeah, we are a leading international interdisciplinary science center advancing the frontier of global sustainability science with a particular focus on how do we build social and environmental resilience to create everything from strong cities to agricultural systems that can cope with shocks and stresses in this era where we've cashed in all the checks and have reached what science now clearly shows is a saturation point. We're starting to hit the ceiling of the capacity of the Earth system to remain stable. And then it's not enough just to deliver on efficiency and optimization. You also have to build resilience, the capacity to invest in diversity, both socially and ecologically, to be, wiser and stronger in the face of a turbulent future.
So by resilience, you literally mean being able to continue into the future?
Fundamentally, we define resilience as our ability to adapt, transform, and continue to develop in situations of surprise and turbulence and change.
And what are the kind of major issues that we're facing now? What would you say are the top challenges facing humanity that urgently need to be addressed?
I would say, just in line with Niklas' introduction here, scientifically there's so much support now to, without any hesitation, unequivocally say that we've reached, a very dire, sharp knife edge where we only have a few decades to either tip over and rush in a transition towards a sustainable future within a safe operating space of a stable Earth system, or we risk just over the next decades to move ourselves to a point where we cross thresholds where we can see the Earth system self-reinforcing irreversibly in a negative direction. We see the first signs just coming in the last few months. It's just a month back that the Woods Hole Institute in the US showed something that really makes us scientists, if it's something that keeps us awake at night, it is when you suddenly see what we call feedbacks change direction. So, since the advent of the Industrial Revolution, there has been no invoices sent by Mother Earth because Mother Earth has actually subsidized our economic development by taking up 50% of all our greenhouse gases in nature on land and in oceans, by taking up 95% of the heat caused by our emission of greenhouse gases in the oceans. This is actually pushing under the rug our debt to Mother Earth. And this is what we call, very pedagogically, negative feedbacks. So we love negative feedbacks. Negative feedbacks dampen and reduce negative pressure. But just 1 month back, we saw for the first time the evidence showing very clearly that all the rainforests on planet Earth have now tipped over from being a net sink to now being a net source of greenhouse gases. And we know that rainforests regulate the stability of the whole Earth system because they take up carbon and they generate rainfall and they clean air. We saw just 1 year back from colleagues that we have at the Resilience Centre that the Great Barrier Reef, the biggest coral reef system we have on planet Earth, which we 10 years back at the El Niño event 1998 showed is so resilient, showed actually never tipped over and got not caught in the El Niño bleaching at the time. Now with the El Niño event 2015-2016 and into 2017, it has tipped over and half, can you imagine, half of the Great Barrier Reef is irreversibly lost, is dead. We don't talk much about that because even the Australian government does not want to talk about it because this is such an enormous hit on the Australian economy. So we're starting to see these cracks in Earth resilience. That's why there's reason for moving very rapidly in this transformation pathway towards a sustainable future.
So now is the time to act. And Niklas, you had a bit of a rallying cry there, I suppose, for entrepreneurs to kind of take up the mantle and address some of these problems. I mean, how are technology entrepreneurs placed to deal with what seem to be quite massive global issues?
Yeah. So as I mentioned was that historically technology has been a problem because we have the engines, we have combustion engines and so forth, which have been, and we always thought that you build business, you create a better economy and GDP increases. Of course there's pollution, we can tackle that. What we see now with both digital technologies, but also technologies in other sciences are starting to actually produce some solutions. And it's very hard for existing incumbents to do this because they have so much of a backlog of their technology and their product, services, and so forth. So this is really the room for a clean sheet of paper, great minds, and a bold vision. And then you can use these new technologies and solve these. And this is, of course, what you need to have. You need to have a problem. You need to have a market, which means that there's consumers which are now really looking for products and services which are sustainable. And with this, so what does it mean? What can digital technologies do? Well, you can create efficiencies. There's, as I mentioned, with on-truck is a great example, but think about all these cars. 95% of these cars are empty. Think about all the pollutions when all these cars are you're stuck in traffic. There's also, food is a huge problem as well. The whole food industry is completely, it's a train wreck, and they have optimized their large-scale production chain, and now we have the supermarkets, and we buy very unhealthy food. In the US, you have a generation which is now predicted to live shorter than the previous generation, largely because of obesity. And we can change that by whether companies here in the UK, like Farm Drop, which is making it possible for us in London to buy local food from local producers, which is healthier, tastes better, and cheaper, and we get it delivered home. So that's a great example of one solution. Mm.
Great. And Johan, I'm interested to hear from your perspective, how much do you think this is a technology issue? How much is it down to kind of developing technologies or using technologies in new ways, like some of the businesses that Niklas mentioned? Can technology fix this? Mm.
No, science is clear we're facing tremendous global risks, but we also see a very positive and exciting tipping point, just has been coming out in discussions here, that we've tipped over into the era of global sustainable development, I would argue as well, that we see very clearly that environmental issues that have always been seen as a sacrifice, how much are we willing to pay to take care of nature, has now tipped over to be the entry point for innovation, for disruptive transformations, and that a competitive edge is clearly to also have sustainability as your entry point in your business models. And just a few weeks back, for example, at the World Economic Forum in New York at the General Assembly of the United Nations, Klaus Schwab, who's the leader of the World Economic Forum, has been, the big ambassador for the fourth industrial revolution, is now clearly talking about this to also be within the safe operating space of planetary boundaries. And that is what we've been discussing a lot, Niklas, could be an engine for even deeper innovation. So I think there's a lot of promise here to see sustainability as the path for a disruptive digital revolution. However, I have not seen so far any scientific scenario into a desirable future where technology solves it all. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely clear that we need equity, we need justice, we need sharing among all citizens on Earth, and we also probably have to accept we need some quite significant behavioral changes in the way we reconnect with our biosphere and kind of think in different ways on consumption and in our linear business models, for example. So it's not a tech only, but tech certainly will play a very, very important role.
What do you mean by behavioral changes?
Well, I mean, for example, I'm very agnostic myself when it comes to economic growth. I think we can have economic growth within the safe operating space on Earth, but I'm also quite sure we'll start seeing deep changes in how we define happiness or welfare, and that we should no longer just measure that in terms of GDP growth, that we're starting to see circular business models and shared economic behavioral changes fundamentally. And that I also look forward, for example, we show scientifically that the way to deliver successfully an outcome for Paris, staying under 2 degrees Celsius of warming, will be to halve emissions every decade. It's kind of a Moore's law equivalent of an innovation pathway towards decarbonizing the world economy. Well, halving emissions every decade, we all can do as individuals. And I could decide, well, I'm not going to fly to Thailand every year, let me do it every second year instead. So I halve my footprint on flying. And that is a kind of a contribution in terms of behavioral change, which might not change the quality of my life, but I'm kind of conscious about steering my own life also, towards decarbonization. So not only relying on someone out there fixing the electrification of the transport system, but also me contributing.
And this desire to do good and, you know, to do good by the planet is obviously great and very admirable. Niklas, you're an investor in several companies that kind of have a bit of an environmental aspect. But, you know, they're not philanthropic enterprises. They are businesses. How can you incentivize entrepreneurs to take these issues into account, or to, you know, set out to do something about them?
That's a great question. So we started a philanthropic foundation 10 years ago to deal with climate change and some social injustice. And we gave grants to non-profit organizations and so forth. And I started to see some opportunities to do what's called impact investing, when you're investing in companies which actually want to do good, but you may not be able to get kind of a good economical return, but it's an alternative. Looking at those kind of companies more and more, and after a few years, we started to see some really, really good companies. And when I was speaking to those founders, it's like, it's great that you have this mission to improve the planet. I just want to build a great business, and I saw a problem. That was kind of the reply I got from some of those entrepreneurs. And so going forward with that, what we are seeing now are, and you will hear from some of these companies coming up on stage after us, is that these are entrepreneurs who are focused on building great businesses. And as a former entrepreneur and founder myself, I know that if you ask founders of most successful tech companies, they're all driven by having an impact, to solve problems. And whether, as in my case, we wanted to fix the global telephone services, and if you're Google, you want to organize the internet, and so forth. You know, Bill Gates wanted to put a PC on every desktop. So it's about entrepreneurs want to solve problems and have a lasting impact. And what entrepreneurs are starting to see more and more today is solving some of these problems. And the more we study this, we realize that, unfortunately, because these problems are getting bigger and bigger, in a way, the opportunity is getting bigger and bigger. So we're, you know, actually some of our best performing companies in our portfolio are some of these companies. So we think, actually, as I said, that some of these companies will be more performing. The other thing what's interesting is something that makes me very optimistic about the whole thing. So our investors in Atomico are large pension funds and others. And some of them are also starting to think about this, that actually they want to put their money to have a positive impact, because it's, as I said, it's the whole ecosystem, from pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, insurance companies, very much insurance companies, by the way, because they need to deal with some of these outcomes, are starting to think in this path.
Great, and it's not just entrepreneurs who can deal with this. As you kind of alluded to earlier, Johan, you know, there's not kind of one easy fix for such a global problem. I mean, what else is needed? What are the other roles here? Perhaps of, say, government or scientists. How does it all fit together?
No, and this might take me out into utopia, perhaps, given how the world is looking like. But you know, we are now no longer this small world on a big planet, the big planet that had kind of redundant atmosphere, redundant ocean, redundant biodiversity. We are the big world on a very small planet. So the fact that the General Assembly of the United Nations, when they signed on the Sustainable Development Goals, actually signed on that these are universal. These are actually goals that all the 196 countries must now, you know, we have to sing the same tune and move on these until 2030. So it is fundamentally, absolutely, on moral grounds and factual grounds, unacceptable when one country steps out of these universal agreements. That is, you know, political suicide in a way. You shouldn't be allowed to do that at this juncture. So I'm a strong believer that political leadership, business, and science needs to hold hand in a unique alliance and now move forward in a very diverse way, but move forward together so that the political leadership supports innovation and disruptive transformation. So, for example, next week, COP23 starts in Bonn, and it will be absolutely fundamental that all the countries that remain in the Paris Agreement step up and say, you know, we are not budging. We're going to decarbonize the world economy in 33 years by 2050, and we're going to provide the incentives to enable innovators to be disruptive and move us in the right path. I don't think business can do it alone. I don't think political leadership can do it alone.
I mean, in the current political climate, and you mentioned there the Paris Agreement, you know, What's the outlook?
I think the outlook is actually, it might surprise you, very positive. I mean, remember that Donald Trump only has one friend, and that is Assad in Syria. They are the only ones who are outside of this agreement. And if you look at what's happening in the US, city mayors, businesses, states are adamantly rising to say that we are staying into Paris. Actually, Donald Trump is a minority in the White House in Washington. And we see the European Union showing clearly that it's, and I hope we'll actually see that in a very concrete way in Bonn next week, showing that we are serious about this. We're actually moving in this direction, which is not about solving an environmental problem. It's about taking ourselves to World 2.0. It's the next step of advanced welfare for humanity. China is on board, India is on board. So I think we simply need to see this manifestation next week on all digital media that the world is still on board.
I think also on that, there's a huge opportunity for any politician to create a competitive advantage, because this is, you know, the next phase of industrial revolution. So if you're leaning forward and trying to create an environment local or encourage businesses to transform and say, like, our city is like, you know, if you're mayor of London, you want to say, like, I'm going to be the smartest city in the world. I'm going to have, like, there's not going to be any, you know, combustion cars. It's going to be all, you know, bicycle sharing, electrical, you know, electrical cars and you know, hyperloops and all those kind of things. And we're going to have, you know, farming in the city and all those things. And that's and you know, a lot of city mayors are starting to think like that, and they're starting to be competitive. And those are things that are very, very positive. So I think that you can really create a competitive environment, and I would say that Europe is really leading the way here in globally.
Great. Well, I love your positive outlook, and I do hope you're both right that things are heading in the positive direction. That's all we've got time for right now. So thank you so much, Niklas Zennström and Johan Rockström.
Thank you.